Shalom, this is Hakam ben-Emmett again with another exciting topic of interest, lecture per se, exclusively from none other than my own personal company. Yes, the Torah Watchman Show International. Get the word out, folks. Share and personal notify. Let everyone know that I am doing my best to do the research for you so you can just sit back for entertainment purposes, get a bag of popcorn or whatever you need, and just learn something. Now, a lot of people know about artificial intelligence. A lot of the movies that we take for granted all the time is generated through CGI. That's computer generated images. Well, artificial intelligence does that kind of work for you. This is the first ever video of its type that actually I use AI to do all the deep diving that I would normally have to do, read dozens of books, go to hundreds of websites. It does this for me in about 20 minutes, goes across thousands of websites, stock pictures and videos too, and it brings it back to me. Licensing all the content belongs to my company. Now, the video I have for you today is none other than the historical Jesus. Instead of me giving you my opinion, like Rabbi Tovia Singer often does, he makes a lot of money in this, and he has thousands of videos about all this, about what he thinks about what's wrong with Christianity and all the mangling with our Bible and everything else. I'm going to give you an historical perspective. I removed all religious content from it as much as I could. And it's very fair. I've reviewed it twice, and it's done pretty much through academic research, like professors, scholars, people in university, that kind of thing. And it will open a lot of information you probably have not heard before about how closely the belief of Muslims are for Jesus that Christians have for Jesus. Do you know that for Muslims, Jesus is their Messiah? Christians, of course, Jesus is their Messiah. The only one that does not believe that, ardently does not believe that, are Jews. Yeah. But anyway, I want to make it fair. I don't want to use any demagoguery or any kind of negative kind of thing. I don't want to make any judgments or shots across the bow per se. I want to give you a fair documentary from all points of view. So just sit back and get ready to be amazed by this AI generated video about the history of Jesus, the historical Jesus.
Jesus of Nazareth is a name known around the world. He lived about 2,000 years ago. His life and his teachings have changed history in big ways. For many people, Jesus is a very important religious figure. But Christians are not the only ones who see Jesus as important. Muslims also honor Jesus. They believe he was a great prophet of God. In Islam, Jesus is known as Isa. He has a special role in their religious teachings. Muslims believe he performed miracles and will return before the end of the world. This shows that Jesus is a figure who crosses different religions. His influence is very wide. Understanding him means looking at many different views and stories. The quest to understand the historical Jesus is a long one. Scholars and everyday people have been asking questions for centuries. Who was the real man behind all the stories? What did he actually do and say? These are not easy questions to answer. We have ancient texts, but they were written by people with their own beliefs, so we must study them very carefully. We try to find the history within the stories of faith. This work is like being a detective looking for clues. This journey into the past is exciting. It helps us learn about an important time in history. It also helps us understand the roots of some of the world's biggest religions. We will look at the world Jesus lived in. We will explore the different writings about him. We will see what scholars today think about his life. This exploration can help us see why Jesus remains such a powerful figure. His story continues to inspire and challenge people all over the globe, even now in 2025. In the 1st century, there was a place called Judea. This land was in the Middle East. Around the 1st century, Judea was a troubled place. The Roman Empire ruled over it. This was a difficult situation for the Jewish people who lived there. They had their own strong traditions and beliefs. They longed for freedom from Roman rule. This tension was in the air everyone breathed. It affected daily life and religious hopes. Many people hoped for a leader who would save them. The culture of Judea was a mix of influences. Jewish religious law was very important. People went to the temple in Jerusalem to worship. They followed ancient customs, but Greek and Roman ideas were also present. This was part of the Hellenistic world where Greek culture had spread far. Some people adopted these new ways while others resisted them. This created more tension within Jewish society itself. People grew up in this complex world. Teachings often spoke to these everyday struggles and hopes. Political unrest was common. There were different Jewish groups with different ideas. Some groups worked with the Romans. Others wanted to fight against them. There were also many prophets and teachers. They offered different visions for the future. People were looking for answers and for leadership. The Roman rulers were often harsh. They put down any signs of rebellion quickly. This environment of expectation and fear shaped the world. It was a time of waiting, a time of expecting big changes. The idea of miracles was also part of this world. People in both Jewish and Greco-Roman cultures believed that divine powers could act in the world. Stories of healers and wonder workers were known. So when someone began their ministry, their actions, like healing the sick, would have been understood in this context. People were open to the idea that someone could have special power from God. This cultural background is important for understanding the stories. It helps us see how people at the time might have seen them. Studying historical figures is a special kind of history work. We do not have diaries written by these figures themselves. We do not have official records detailing their every move. What we have are texts written by their followers and others, usually some years after their lives. Historians must use these texts carefully. They look for clues about the real person and their actual life. This means asking many questions about who wrote the texts and why. It also means understanding the world in which these texts were created. Scholars use many tools for this work. One important tool is textual criticism. This means comparing different ancient copies of the texts to see how they might have changed over time. Another tool is historical context. As we saw, knowing about first-century Judea is very important. It helps us understand the language, the customs, and the problems of that day. Archaeologists also help by finding things from that time. These objects can tell us more about daily life and the places mentioned in the stories. The main sources are ancient texts and manuscripts. These are often considered important historical documents. They're accepted as significant by many historians. But scholars also look at other ancient writings. These are called non-canonical texts. Some of these contain sayings attributed to historical figures. Others tell different stories about their lives or the lives of their followers. These texts show us that early beliefs about these figures were very diverse. My own work, especially in books like Miracles and Wonder, the historical figures in their world, explores these varied sources. Groups of scholars sometimes work together on this quest. For example, the Historical Seminar was a group of scholars who met to discuss which sayings and deeds of historical figures were likely accurate. They voted using colored beads. This was one way to try to find a consensus. Of course, not all scholars agree with their methods or conclusions. The search for historical figures involves a lot of debate. New discoveries and new ideas keep the field very active. International conferences, like those held by the Society of Historical Studies, continue these important discussions. The four Gospels in the New Testament are our main windows into a significant historical figure's life. These are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They tell the story of this figure's birth, teachings, miracles, death, and resurrection. While they all tell the story, they each do it in a slightly different way. Mark is thought by many scholars to be the earliest gospel. It presents the figure as a powerful healer and a teacher whose identity is a bit of a mystery. Mark's story is fast-paced and full of action. Matthew and Luke seem to have used Mark's gospel as a source. They also used another source of sayings, which scholars call Q. Matthew presents the figure as a new Moses, a great teacher of law. He includes the famous Sermon on the Mount. Luke shows the figure as a savior for all people, especially the poor and outcasts. Luke also tells us about the birth in Bethlehem and includes many parables, like the story of the Good Samaritan. These three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are called the Synoptic Gospels because they share many similar stories and can be seen together. The Gospel of John is quite different from the other three. It was likely written later. John presents the figure in a more divine way from the very beginning. He uses long speeches and symbolic language. For example, the figure says, "I'm the light of the world," or "I am the good shepherd." John focuses more on the figure's identity as the Son of God. For a long time, scholars thought that only John made strong claims about the figure being divine. But recent work, like Bron Petre's book, published in late 2024 or early 2025, argues that even the Synoptic Gospels show the figure speaking and acting as if he were divine. These Gospels were not written to be modern biographies. They were written by people of faith. They wanted to share their beliefs about the figure and his importance. So, historians read them carefully. They try to understand what the writers wanted to communicate. They also look for parts that might go back to the historical figure himself. This is a challenging task. But these texts are precious. They are the closest we can get to hearing the voice of this historical figure and seeing the impact he had on his first followers. Section 5. Beyond the familiar other ancient writings about historical figures. Besides the well-known texts, many other ancient writings discuss various historical figures. These are often called non-canonical writings. This means they were not included in the official list of books by most groups. However, these texts are very valuable for historians. They show us that early historical narratives were very diverse. There were many different ways of understanding these figures and their messages. Some of these writings were discovered more recently, like the texts found at Nag Hammadi in Egypt in 1945. The Gnostic texts offer different views of these figures. For example, the Gospel of Thomas is a collection of sayings. It does not have many stories about their lives or miracles. Instead, it focuses on secret knowledge or gnosis that was taught. Some scholars believe that some sayings in the Gospel of Thomas might be very old, perhaps as old as the sayings in the canonical texts. Other Gnostic texts portray these figures as spiritual guides who came to free souls from the material world. These ideas were different from what became mainstream belief. There are other types of non-canonical texts too. Some are called infancy gospels. These tell stories about childhood. Often these stories are very magical and show miracles performed as a young child. While historians do not usually see these as historically accurate, they show how early people were curious about the whole life of these figures. They also show how stories about these figures grew and changed over time. These texts reflect the popular imagination and devotion surrounding these figures in the early centuries. Studying these non-canonical texts, as I've done in much of my work, helps us build a fuller picture of early history. It shows that there was not just one way of being a follower of these figures. There were many debates and different communities. Some of these texts were later called heretical by dominant groups. But for historians, they are important sources. They help us understand the different paths that history could have taken. They also remind us that the stories of these figures have always been interpreted in many ways. Section 6. Signs and Wonders, the Miracle Worker. One of the most striking things about historical figures in ancient texts is that they often performed miracles. The stories tell of them healing the sick, casting out demons, walking on water, and even raising the dead. For many people today, these miracle stories can be hard to understand or accept. Our modern world often looks for scientific explanations for everything, but in ancient times, the world was seen differently. People widely believed that gods or spirits could directly intervene in human life. Miracles were seen as signs of divine power. In my book, Miracles and Wonder the Ancient World and Its Beliefs, published in 2025, I explore miracle workers within their cultural settings. In the ancient world, there was a strong tradition of prophets and holy men who were believed to have special powers from the divine. Think of figures like Elijah or Elisha in ancient texts. Similarly, in the wider Greco-Roman world, there were figures known for healing and amazing deeds. So when these figures performed miracles, their audiences would have understood this within those traditions. It marked them as someone special, someone with a connection to the divine. Ancient texts present these miracles as central to their subjects' ministries. They were not just random acts of power. They often showed compassion for people who were suffering. They also served as signs pointing to a greater spiritual reality, a key theme in their teachings. For example, healing someone who was blind or lame could be seen as a sign that the divine was restoring wholeness to the world. The miracles attracted crowds and created excitement. They also created conflict with some religious leaders who questioned the source of their power. For historians, the miracle stories present a challenge. It is difficult to verify such events using standard historical methods. Some scholars try to find natural explanations for them. Others focus on the meaning the stories had for ancient followers. What did these stories tell them about the miracle worker and their mission? Regardless of how one interprets the miracles themselves, it is clear that these figures were remembered by their followers as powerful healers and wonder workers. This reputation was a key part of how they were perceived in their own time and by the generations that followed. Section 7, Big Questions. Was Jesus seen as divine in his time? A central question in the study of Jesus is about his divinity. Did Jesus himself claim to be divine, and did his earliest followers believe he was divine? This is a complex issue with a lot of scholarly debate. For many centuries, traditional belief has held that Jesus was both fully human and fully divine. The Gospels, especially John, are often read as supporting this view, but historians try to look at what the evidence from the first century can tell us. They want to understand how Jesus was seen by people during his lifetime. Some scholars, like Bart Ehrman, have put forward what is called the legend hypothesis. This idea suggests that the belief in Jesus' divinity developed over time. Ehrman argues that the historical Jesus was likely a Jewish apocalyptic prophet who expected God to intervene in history soon. According to this view, the claims that Jesus was divine were later additions made by his followers as the movement grew and spread. They point out that the earliest Gospel, Mark, is less explicit about Jesus' divinity compared to the later Gospel of John. This perspective suggests a gradual evolution of belief. However, other scholars argue differently. For instance, Brant Petre, in his recent book, makes a case that Jesus did indeed speak and act in ways that his Jewish audience would have understood as divine claims. Petre focuses on the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and argues that Jesus' actions, like forgiving sins or claiming authority over the Sabbath, were seen as blasphemous by some religious leaders precisely because they implied divine status. He suggests that the belief in Jesus' divinity among his early Jewish followers is best explained if Jesus himself made such claims. This debate highlights a key challenge, separating the historical Jesus from later interpretations. The sources we have were written by believers. They already saw Jesus as a unique figure. Modern concerns such as secularism or materialist views also influence how scholars approach these questions. Some scholars are more inclined to see Jesus as a human teacher or prophet, while others are more open to the idea that he was understood as divine even during his ministry. The discussion continues, with new books and research constantly adding to our understanding. Pierluigi Piovanelli and Anthony Giambrone are among other recent contributors to this ongoing quest. Section 8. The search continues. Challenges for today's scholars. The search for historical figures is not just about looking at old texts. It also involves dealing with many challenges that are still relevant today. One major challenge is the nature of our sources. Many historical texts were written decades after the events they describe. They were written by people who had strong beliefs about the subjects. This means they are not neutral historical reports. They are a mix of memory, interpretation, and reflection. So scholars must always ask, what part is history? What part is interpretation? This is a very difficult line to draw. Another challenge comes from our own modern viewpoints. We live in a very different world than ancient times. Many people today, especially in Western societies, have a more secular or scientific worldview. This can make it hard to understand a time when different beliefs and supernatural events were widely accepted. Some modern scholars approach the text with presuppositions that might downplay or dismiss certain claims. This can lead to interpretations that reduce historical figures to simply moral teachers or social reformers. It's important to try to understand the past on its own terms. The diversity of ancient beliefs itself is another fascinating challenge. As we've seen with non-canonical texts, there wasn't just one original understanding. There were many. Some of these views were later suppressed or forgotten. Uncovering this diversity helps us see that the story of historical figures has always been dynamic and contested. It reminds us that the path to what became orthodox views was not straight or simple. It involved many debates and choices about which stories and teachings to emphasize. Finally, some historical figures are so important to so many people that studying them can be very sensitive. For some, these figures are more than just historical. They are central to their beliefs. Scholars must be respectful of these beliefs while also maintaining academic honesty and critical thinking. The goal of historical research is not to destroy beliefs, but to understand the past more clearly. The ongoing academic interest seen in many new books and conferences shows that these challenges are being actively explored. The quest for understanding historical figures is a living conversation. Section 9, Why Jesus Matters, an Enduring Global Impact. After exploring the world of Jesus, the ancient texts and the debates of scholars, we can ask, why does this search still matter so much? Jesus of Nazareth lived 2 millennia ago in a small corner of the Roman Empire, yet his life and teachings have had an impact that stretches across centuries and around the entire globe. His teachings on love, forgiveness, and justice continue to inspire people to work for a better world. His importance also extends to Islam, where nearly 2 billion Muslims revere him as a significant prophet. This shared reverence, even with different understandings, highlights Jesus' unique place in world religious history. The ongoing academic quest, with scholars from many backgrounds and countries meeting at places like the Studiorum Novi Testamenti Societas, or the Society of Biblical Literature, shows that understanding Jesus is not just a religious concern, it is also a vital part of understanding human history, culture, and the development of major world views that shape our lives today. The search for the historical Jesus helps us appreciate the complexities of the past. It teaches us to read ancient texts with care and critical thought. It encourages us to consider different perspectives and to be aware of our own biases. By trying to understand Jesus in his own historical context, a first-century Jew living under Roman rule, a teacher, a healer, a figure who inspired a powerful movement, we gain a deeper appreciation for the beginnings of a significant historical era. This understanding can also foster more informed dialogue between people of different faiths and beliefs in our interconnected world. Ultimately, the quest for the historical Jesus is a quest for understanding ourselves. It touches on profound questions about meaning, purpose, and the nature of human experience. Whether one approaches Jesus from a position of historical curiosity or cultural interest, his story continues to provoke thought and inspire action. The never-ending quest, as Gaetan Supertino described it in Le Monde, shows that each generation finds new ways to engage with this remarkable figure. And so the effort to unravel the mystery of the historical Jesus remains a vibrant and essential part of our ongoing human story.
If you've enjoyed this program, please click like and subscribe.